Welcome to the Ideal Spaces Working Group podcast.
This is podcast featuring Dr. Ulrich Gehmann in Grand Rainham with Ettore Mazzola. Perhaps you can introduce yourself.
I'm an architect. I have my own firm in Rome. I've been teaching for 12 years. Before taking my graduation, I was working as assistant professor already at the University of La Sapienza, first with the Professor Gianfranco Moneta, and then for a few years with Paolo Portoghesi. But in 2001, I was hired by the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture, and I've been teaching in the last 25 years for them. And they have this fantastic program because the third year is totally spent in Italy. And also one semester of the graduate program is spent in Italy in order to study directly from the cities, the buildings, and the masterpieces, the Italian culture. So it's a kind of a culture, obviously, in terms of architecture, urbanism, and arts. So it's a kind of grand tour that is re-elaborated when the students are learning directly from place. And it's amazing the difference when they arrive and when they leave, because they are really extremely sought after. All the most important firms of architecture wants to have our students because this passage through Rome, through Italy, through Europe is giving them some incredible knowledge that is making them very different. Also, the way we are teaching in our school, which is using computer only after the third year. Until the third year, they have to draw by hand. We make a project with the watercolors. We approach the project from the urban scale to the scale of details, and including structures in traditional building techniques, because we are taking care about the very sense of sustainability. And so we are promoting also the use of materials that are lasting in centuries and centuries, so life cycle. That is really sustainable, and also buildings built with the materials and walls that are performing in excellent manner to reduce the consumption of energy without using any industrial solution that is just false sustainability.
Well, I think that's an important background to recur and to rest upon traditional architecture in its best sense. No? Having this in mind, and having in mind the discussion we led today in our workshop about community place, the necessity of place in the context of the city, very direct and blunt question to you. How do you see the future of the city and of the European city?
It's a good question. And as I said during the workshop, I love to see the glass half full instead of half empty. And as I also wrote in several books I wrote, which are not based on theories that I derive from myself, like many guru of modernist movement, but are simply based on my passion for history and are based on the importance of watching our back for a proper future instead of reinventing the wheel every day. The future is, it could be considered very positive, because it's true that probably we are born in the worst moment of urbanism and architecture. If with a magic wand I can cancel something, I would cancel everything that has been made from the 60s to nowadays, because it's a horribly bad in any kind of aspect. It's not only an aesthetic aspect, that is, especially in terms of consumption, pollution, the damages made on this planet with the amount of land consumption and toxic material that have been used in architecture and urbanism in the last 60 years is definitely insane. And it is exactly, well, it was presented on those days during, immediately after Second World War, already before, as a functionalist city, because they never used the word modernism, but they were using the word functionalist. And today is exactly what we can consider dysfunctional. And today is happening the same with what is presented as sustainable, that is going to be, in a while, it is already recognized as unsustainable. That's why I prefer to talk, like in my book that is coming soon, of inheritability more than sustainability. But thinking at the glass half full, we inherited some cities which are much bigger than what they really need to be, whose costs of maintenance and management are impossible, because no horrible taxation worse than the one we have in Italy can cover this cost. And this is the reason why the public realm is going worse and worse, until we will beat the head on the wall and we realize that something is wrong to be repaired. But now we can take in consideration the agenda that has been imposed after the COP25, 26, 27, 28, and 29, especially the one of 26, 27. And we know that by 2035 it's necessary to change something in order to reduce the consumption and in order to make the building more efficient. But making the building more efficient is not what has been done, especially after the COVID, with the massive investment to impose the construction of codes outside of the building to make the building performing better, but materials that are being used that are dangerous because are easy to be burned. And we remember what happened in London in a building with this insulation system that is extremely dangerous. And something similar happened in Milan recently. Something similar happening in Rome recently. So this is clearly not the right way. Obviously, those measures are generally made to make the interests of industry that is producing pseudo-sustainable solutions, while we have buildings that are still standing after more than 1 millennia and are performing very well, because historical buildings, you don't need to turn on the heating system in winter, and you don't need at all any air conditioning in summer, which means that they perform better. But the problem of energy consumption is not only related to the performance of the building itself, because there is this idea of a class A plus, etc. But there is also the urban problem. The urban problem is extremely serious, and having a class A plus building in some suburban, because we can talk about urban, condition of class Z is unsustainable in any case. So in Italy, we have a great precedent, which is something that I'm going to talk about tomorrow, that is showing what happened after the unification of Italy, when we had an explosion of the size of Rome, which was in the end of Roman Empire, a city of almost 2 million of inhabitants that was contained within the Aurelian walls, which is 13.8 kilometers square. So almost 2 million of inhabitants. And today we have a city of 2.8 million of inhabitants, but the size is 1,387 square kilometers. So there is an incredible land consumption. And studies made by important university in the US, for instance, have demonstrated how the paved surface are worsening the climate. So we need to reduce as much as possible this. So watching the glass half full, as I said, I can consider what happened at the beginning of the 20th century when the city was growing so fast, and it was recognized that the biggest problem to build houses for the immigrants that were moving to Rome from 165,000 of inhabitants to 1.2 million in 60 years, roughly. These are insane numbers. The quality of buildings that was built was extremely high. But the city was forced to develop these places outside of the historical part because the cost of land was the highest one. It was recognized that the biggest problem to solve the problem of housing was that. And indeed, in 1909, the Congress on Social Housing that was held in London identified the same problem on the land value. So, especially after the laws, the decrees that were developed in 1967 in Italy, it were imposed the presence of minimum standard in dimensioning the cities, in the sense that according to the cubic meter of building, was necessary to produce such a percentage of square meters of surfaces for green spaces, for parking, for schools, for all these things. But it was also imposed the measure of distances, which at the end is affecting all these planets after the idea of the zoning developed after Le Corbusier's ideas, and the idea of promoting a city for separating people instead of gathering people. So the single family house detached from the next one, or in the case of Italy, the case of Rome, the palazzina type, which is no longer part of an urban fabric, but is an isolated building that has to stand 10 meters from the street, 10 meters from the next property that is 10 meters on the other side. So we left large pieces of land empty. We created in front of the building some gap between the building and the street. So eliminating the presence of the building on the sidewalk, shops disappear, streets became wider than what they are. A lot of parking lots were realized. A lot of large spaces were left to be parked, and those things were never built. Parking were overdimensioned, streets were overdimensioned. So what we inherited from this absurd way of developing the city is an immense public land, because all these empty spaces are belonging to the public domain. So instead of making projects extending the city on the land of some developers that wants to make the business in the middle of nowhere, as I like to say, 3 meters away from the sign of welcome on the planet Earth, we can recompact the city, filling the voids that are belonging to the state. And so because the agenda of COP 26, 27, 28 says that we have to change the kind of building in terms of energy, instead of wasting money to transform with a temporary solution buildings that are consuming a lot, we can reconfigure the city, filling the voids and moving few meters the inhabitants from one building to another that is performing better, redesigning the city, because what has been forgotten in the 20th century is the really urban idea of designing the spaces, shaping the spaces, because I love to define architecture, urbanism, the art of shaping the spaces and designing the stroll, inviting the people to share the public spaces. The city of the 20th century is designed just for speculation. It is forgetting completely the very meaning of urbanism. And so we have the opportunity now, thanks to this agenda, to think about a kind of a new Marshall Plan, where we don't have to rebuild the city because of the bombing of the Second World War, but we have to redesign the city, rebuild the city to replace the monstrosity and the unhealthy kind of spaces that have been designed. Because health is not only, some illness because of the pollution, but it's also the social health. Is also the depression that is caused by depressive districts, which are I define it criminogenic, because they're really inviting to the crime, and this is not what urbanism and architecture must be.
This is a very good and concise answer, addressing related aspects of relevance as regards, in my eyes, as regards a reimagination of the city as a space in total, that is needed nowadays, after this 20th century
mistakes.
So let's call them mistakes. Good. The next point related to the very next future of cities is, if such a program, as you outlined it, would succeed, to give a sketch, how a city of the future would look like in social terms, in terms of improvement. So it gets better.
Absolutely great question. Because the other aspect I like to define urbanism is also the mission of the architects, the town planner, must be the development and reinforcement of the sense of belonging, until the imposition of the international style. Because at the end, we use the word modernism, but no one of the architects of modernism used that word. They started using the word functionalism, and then they turned to talk about international style, which was presented as a very positive things to make a city that was equal for everybody. But in the middle of nowhere, in a country without any history, you can do whatever you like, and you can do an international style. But our cities in Europe, in Italy, are the consequences of the idea, the unbelievable, beautiful idea, especially of the communal period in Italy, of using urbanism and architecture as a topic to present the wellness of places, hiring the best architects, the best artists to promote a culture. After the fighting of families during the feudal period, they engage a fighting that was not used with a weapon, but was using urbanism and architecture and art and sculpture and painting as a representation of the prosperity of the places. Is not a case if Ambrogio Lorenzetti is using the image of Siena inside and outside the wall to celebrate the beautiful consequences, positive consequences of the good government. So that means that on those days, the sense of belonging, the identity of places was extremely powerful. Not going that far, since I mentioned Siena, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I was with my students traveling in Tuscany, and they were really astonished watching how we can identify a distinction between the type of the Palazzo Senese and the Palazzo Fiorentino, but also the Palazzo of San Gimignano, noticing that, for instance, the shape of the arch that is used in San Gimignano, which still has the shape of a kind of horseshoe like the Byzantine, then is becoming the typical Senese arch that looks like an upside-down shield. Or you go to Florence, you have the full centering arch with this massive coining. So it's possible within the same region, with a few kilometers of distance, to see how the regional character is important. And this means that within the same period, within the same style, if you want to use the word style, which is wrong, but it doesn't matter, we can see how places are different one each other, because what is really making the difference is the character, and it's the character that is related with the local conditions, local habits, local materials, etc., etc. So the city of the future needs to recover the importance of the sense of belonging. And it's not a case if when there are wars, the worst kind of crimes is not only obviously the murder of people whose life is limited, but is the destruction of the symbol of identities to make people depressed and stop fighting, because there is no longer anything to defend. And so the city of the future has to take care about this, has to make spaces that people are defending, obviously not with a war, with a weapon, that are defending, protecting from any kind of rape, if I can use this horrible word, because, for instance, the writers that are making signs and drawings and monstrosity on the buildings are generally people moving from the suburbia, where they live, but more than living, they survive, because these are not spaces for living, and they have a revenge on the buildings in the center, because the center is the representation of something that is making them sad, because they live in the wrong location. The lack of importance and respect for the public realm, the common good, is another invitation to damage the building. But when everything looks like in the Buon Governo of Lorenzetti, well maintained, and is developing the sense of belonging, people are blocking those that are raping the building. It's really something that has been demonstrated at the beginning of the 20th century. Tomorrow we will talk about also this. The analysis made by sociologists and anthropologists, analyzing the behavior of people, even the very poor people, the immigrant people, because now there is also the rising of racism against the immigrants. And we always blame these poor people that are punished several times, not only one, because the first one is to be obliged to abandon their origin. Then they arrive here and they are abused, to being used as a low-cost labor. And then they are also asked to refuse their religious belief. So they can't have a temple, a church, a mosque to pray, because they have to be integrated in our culture. When Augustus brought the peace in the ancient Roman world, the first things to do, the trick to solve the problem of peace, was to respect all the tradition, to host in Rome the temple of the other religion. This is something that we need to understand today. And so it was anthropological demonstrated that whoever lives on one level of the social classes, next to another one, try to imitate the behavior of the one that is just one step above. The poor doesn't want to appear like the king, but wants to be part of the mass, not to be identified as the troublemaker. It's a self-education. And this is something that is part of the urban design. Making district only for the working class is completely wrong. It has been well understood already in the 80s, 1870, when Paris was on fire, like in 2005, because during the Second Industrial Revolution, the urban development was made parking the poor away and crystallizing the problem. And then it was identified in Rome at the beginning of the 20th century that it was strictly forbidden to build a district only for the working class, because this was crystallizing the problem. But this was also the trick, which is the one I'm thinking about for this Marshall Plan I was mentioning earlier, where you can have buildings where people of different social classes are living together, because they are making this kind of self-education, as I said. And it's something that is not utopia, because this was well demonstrated with the development of the district Testaccio in Rome at the beginning of the 20th century, where the violence disappeared. And because of that, the slogan of the Istituto per le Case Popolari became La Casa Sana ed Educatrice, the healthy and educational home, because they understood how buildings were performing the educational role to improve the behavior of these people. And those that promoted this construction were the inhabitants of the district that was the problematic district, thanks to the work of a proto-sociologist, Domenico Rano, who created the Committee for the Moral and Economic Improvement of Testaccio, understanding all this problem, working hand in hand with the people of any kind of religious belief, regional origin, political belief, etc., etc. So we have the precedents that it's possible to be taken in consideration. And so the city of the future has to facilitate, as it was written in the urban code of those days. It was one article that was saying, if urbanists can facilitate the integration of social classes, the entire society will be in debt with the urbanists. All these incredible achievements that were cancelled during the fascist time with the laws of 1925 are there in a drawer waiting to be reused, which is something that I propose in my project, I proposed with my students. And it's something that is not valid only to Italy, but it's valid all around the world. And it's also something that is extremely important in terms of economy, because something is to build the district, the working class district, where you have no return, economic return, because you rent for almost an existing monthly fee, the apartment. And it's something is to say, okay, I need 40 houses for social housing. I built 100 houses and shops. And with the profit of the apartment for sale and the shop for sale, I can zero the cost of construction of social housing. So I make the integration, but I also make the business. And I do a society that is more just and is not making distinction and is preventing the problem of crystallization of troubles in the suburbia.
It's a very interesting concept. This reminds me on a Renaissance saying, Italian Renaissance, in the context of a fresco in Siena from Domenico di Bartolo, when they are building on the city, as building on the city means building on society.
Exactly.
So do you see the architect and the architecture of tomorrow taking back the lead in building identity in community?
Definitely, yes. Definitely, yes. Until the 40s, even in the US, cities used to have some identity, independently from the very poor urban structure based on the grid, which is something that Richard Sennett said was the first manifestation of dictatorship, because that kind of urban structure is negating the banality of every day and the needs of people of having something more informal rather than the formal. But in any case, cities used to have their identity. The buildings of Boston were different from those of New York or Chicago. And this was the identity of places, which is still well documented in pictures. Then after Second World War, already in the 40s, because of the law, because of the crazy theory of Le Corbusier in Europe, but Frank Lloyd Wright in the US, because we are always blaming Le Corbusier because of his Vie Radieuse, where he's saying, I must live 30 miles away from the place where I'm working, and I have to drive my car under pine trees, consuming gears, tires, oil, etc. And my secretary has to do the same in the opposite direction, and she has to consume, etc., because this is good for the economy of everybody. But nobody known that the career of Le Corbusier was sponsored by the car producer Voisin in France. But in parallel, in the US, Frank Lloyd Wright was promoting the broadacre city. which was, they were both based on the land consumption
Mhm.
and the confusion between the city and the countryside.
Mhm. And he sold it as democracy in his book, When Democracy
Of
Grows.
course, of course.
We have it here.
Yeah.
With this one, you know.
Exactly, of course. And so what happened is that in the US, the car industry purchased all the public transportation system to dismantle, and they celebrated the independency from public transportation by burning the tram in the cities, like the mayor of Portland, Oregon, said in one conference of the International Making Cities Livable Conference. This is something that could be done all around the world, because it's not only Italy, it's not only Europe that needs this intervention. Because at the end, probably the country that is making the worst kind of problem to the climate change due to the surfaces is probably the US, which is the place where George Bush Jr. said, American lifestyle is not negotiable. This is unacceptable, because American lifestyle is showing cities that are bigger than region. Los Angeles has an incredible, insane surface. Skyscrapers are consumptive, are consuming such amount of energy because they're addicted on air conditioning, which is insane. If you simply turn off all these air conditioning system in summer, probably the temperature goes down at least 5 degrees, because to have the cool inside the building, you have to produce a lot of heat outside, and this is crazy. So these kind of spaces are living until we have a low-cost oil. But this is over, because as James Howard Kunstler demonstrated, in 2035, it will be the end of low-cost oil. And he depicted perfectly what we are experiencing since the beginning of the 21st century. The amount of wars he announced, he was not Nostradamus, he was not Cassandra, but analyzing the data, analyzing the cost to produce 1 barrel of oil and the system to do it, is bringing to 2035, when the cost of oil for 1 barrel will be more, to produce 1 barrel will be more than 1 barrel. And this at the end changed completely. And that's why the title was The Long Emergency, because then what is happening later? Because all the so-called clean energy are depending on oil, because if you want to produce, to buy any material, anything is depending on that. So it's ridiculous that we don't understand that there is a problem to be approached before happening, because later will be too late.
I really want to thank you. That was an amazing conversation. And
thank you.
I hope we can do further ones in the future, because you're a very interesting man with a very good mind.
Thank you very much. It's very fun.